What if I told you that the largest political group in the United States isn't the Republican or Democratic Party? That this group is hidden in plain sight, literally decides who wins America's elections, and yet mainstream pundits act like they don't exist. I'm talking about independents, people who participate in politics but don't align themselves with the red or blue party. Significantly more Americans identify as independent than as Republican or Democrat. So why is this demographic, the largest, most influential voting bloc, almost completely ignored by the media and political establishment? In this video, we're going to talk about what the latest polling says, why so many people identify as independent, and how this will continue to matter for our nation's politics. A Gallup poll conducted in the second quarter of 2025 asked over 1,000 Americans the following question: in politics, as of today, do you consider yourself a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent? 28% of people responded Republican, a record low of 27% selected Democrat, and a whopping 45% answered independent. I'll admit, when I first read that statistic, I thought, well, that can't be right. If our politics feels more tribal than ever, how can there be that many people who don't want to pick a side? Thinking about that question was not only what led me to make this video, but to actually create this channel in the first place, aimed at people in the center. If that sounds like you, hit subscribe so you don't miss what we cover next. But anyway, back to the polling, because this is where it gets really interesting. Here's a graph from Gallup showing political affiliation since the 90s. As you can see, independents have seen consistent growth since the 2010s, while both major parties continue to fall, especially Democrats. Independents first outnumbered supporters of both major parties back in 1991, and have continued to do so since then, except for a brief dip during the mid-2000s. And in several US states, registered independents outnumber registered members of both parties combined. Now, yes, many independents still lean one way or another when voting, sometimes being forced to pick the lesser of two evils. But nearly half consider themselves pure independents, meaning they don't see themselves leaning one way or another at all. So what's causing this trend? Well, at first, I thought it could be apathy. Maybe people who don't know or care a lot about politics just pick independents as default, but that's mostly not true. A 2018 Pew Research study found that independents are largely not apathetic or uninformed. In fact, many are highly engaged, but simply disillusioned with the two-party system. I would argue that they're not discouraged because they don't care about any issues, but because they feel that neither party cares about them. We also know that younger adults are far more likely to be independent than previous generations, and polls of young people say many are feeling frustrated about where the country is taking them. Another trend I think is causing this shift is that US politics has gotten much more tribalistic in recent years. There's a growing attitude that you have to think exactly like us or you don't belong. So as our politics has gotten more polarized, it can leave people with more unique beliefs feeling left behind. According to The Hill, experts say one of the main drivers in independent voters is a growing discontent with the two-party system. This increasing divide seems to be pushing people either more toward the extremes or away from the spectrum entirely. Couple that with declining trust in institutions and the media, and a growing sense that strict ideology doesn't always lead to the best solutions, and you start to see why so many people are avoiding the establishment parties. I think it would also be helpful for me to talk about why I consider myself an independent. Now, obviously my views aren't going to line up with everyone's, but I think there's a lot of you who might relate to part of my story. On certain issues, I lean in ways you might call conservative, like believing in free speech, a responsible budget policy, and the idea that government should only do what it's best at. But I've never been drawn to become a Republican because, to me, it feels like a party that revolves around the personality of one man. And if you have big issues with that man, it feels like the party wants nothing to do with you. Of course, there are a lot of different reasons people might feel disconnected from the two major parties, but I think many of us share that same sense of not fitting neatly into either box. If that sounds like you, I would love to hear why in the comments. So we know that independents include a lot of people, but how do they impact elections, and why are they so neglected by pundits and the mainstream media? When politicians talk about the public, it's like they pretend independents don't even exist. It seems that the modern strategy is to rile up more of your base than to try to win anyone new. For example, in the 2024 presidential election, after Trump received about 77 million votes and Harris received about 75 million votes, many outlets on the right called this a massive landslide victory for Trump. Meanwhile, outlets on the left stress how tight the race was, pointing out that more people voted against Trump than for him. But both sides missed something crucial. 90 million eligible citizens didn't vote for either party at all. Of course, it's impossible to get a 100% turnout, but that means that huge swaths of the American public go completely unrepresented in government. And as we've already established, it isn't always because they don't care. It's often because they feel that neither side cares about them. Many are too busy to vote, or forget, or even stay home as a kind of silent protest. When they do choose to vote, independents have enormous power. Independent candidates have the ability to significantly alter results by spoiling for one major candidate or another. In 1992, Ross Perot, an independent from Texas, took home almost 19% of the presidential vote. Historians generally agree this was the deciding factor that caused George H.W. Bush to lose his second term to Clinton. Even today, independent candidates are able to secure a surprising amount of support, given the fact that most people consider it a waste of a ballot. In the 2024 election, even after he withdrew from the race and endorsed Donald Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. still won over 750,000 votes. Independents are also more likely to change their vote between elections. In our electoral system, the decision of a consistent voter in a safe state matters less than a swing voter in a swing state. Independents are often the decisive factor in swing states, and have historically been courted by both parties in elections. Independents also have power in state and local elections, especially in places where the party mix is tightly split. Independents are also often a leading indicator of political trends. Their changes in opinion can predict broader shifts in the political landscape as a whole. But mainstream political discourse continues to neglect independents. Debate stages exclude them unless they're polling high. Pundits dismiss them as irrelevant. This creates a situation where independents are powerful in numbers but invisible in coverage. And because independents don't have a unified organization or single leader, they are easy for politicians and lobbyists to ignore. Furthermore, they struggle to compete with the political machine built on party infrastructure. Without a party, there is no built-in network for fundraising or grassroots organization. And according to Unite America, 24 million taxpayers are denied access to publicly funded primary elections. This is because 22 states do not allow citizens to vote in a primary election if they haven't joined the party. So what does this mean going forward? And how can independents disillusioned by both parties respond? In my opinion, one of the best ways to make change would be the introduction of ranked choice voting. Unlike traditional first-past-the-post voting, RCV allows people to rank multiple candidates in order of their preference, from first to last. Right now, most people don't vote independent because they're afraid of wasting their vote. RCV fixes that problem. Ranked choice voting has already been implemented in Alaska and Maine for all federal elections, and many major city elections like New York and Minneapolis. If you've ever felt like neither party represents you, you're not alone. In fact, you're part of the largest political bloc in America. But under our current system, the shouting match from the extremes drowns out the quieter voice of the majority in the middle. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments. If you'd like to hear about how polarization is leading to more political violence, you can watch the video on screen. Thanks for watching.